And we're live.
Hello and welcome to a very special episode of the Politics Hour, where we are discussing all things European Super League. My name is Lindsay Eyre, and today I'm joined by Tom Mitchell and Fuad Hassan, and our wonderful guests Neil Atkinson, Kieran Maguire and Adi Williams. What a week it has been for football. In the next hour, we will be covering everything from the story of the European Super League, from its rocky start to its miserable end, and getting insight from our experts and fans about what all of this means for the future of the beautiful game. So on Sunday afternoon, the news broke just before the Sunday kickoff between Arsenal and Fulham that 12 clubs from England, Spain and Italy had agreed to take part in a new European Super League. The league would work through two groups of 10 teams, followed by a playoff phase. There would ideally be 15 founding teams, however Bayern Munich, Borussia Dortmund and Paris Saint-Germain declined to take part. The other 5 teams were made up of European teams on a merit qualifying basis. By Sunday evening, the news was all over social media, with the Premier League quickly condemning the plans, which was followed by every other major football body, including UEFA and the English, Spanish and Italian football federations. UEFA said they would use all measures possible to stop the cynical project, and political intervention wasn't far behind either, with a statement from Prime Minister Boris Johnson in which he said that he would support the sports authorities in taking action. Condemnations from across the football industry also came flooding in, including this from former Manchester United and England defender captain Gary Neville.
But I'm disgusted, absolutely disgusted. It's an absolute disgrace. And honestly, we have to wrestle back the power in this country from the clubs at the top of this league, and that includes my club. And I've been calling for 12 months as part of another group for an independent regulator to bring checks and balances in place to stop this happening. It's pure greed. They're imposters. They're imposters. They're nothing to do. The owners of this club, the owners of Liverpool, the owners of Chelsea, the owners of Manchester City, they're nothing to do with football in this country. There are 100 and odd years of history in this country from fans that have lived and loved these clubs, and they need protecting. The fans need protecting.
On Monday, things ramped up with a legal battle brewing between the European Super League and the FIFA and UEFA presidents to issue a notice of legal proceedings in the European courts, which would block any sanctions the two bodies may try and impose on the Super League. All 12 clubs also resigned from the European Club Association, as Manchester United Executive Vice Chairman Ed Woodward and Manchester City Chief Executive stood down from their roles at UEFA. Then the mass criticism from players, UEFA officials and mostly fans came. Elan Road became a protest point on Monday evening for the Leeds versus Liverpool game, where the supporters were joined by fans from many clubs to protest against Liverpool's decision to enter the European Super League. Tuesday was met with the same competitive approach. European Super League chairman and Real Madrid president Florentino Perez had appeared on Spanish late-night TV to defend the Super League and say that clubs were doing this to save football at this critical moment, and young people are no longer interested in football. Later in the day, Boris Johnson held a meeting with representatives from the FA, Premier League and football fan groups and the 40 non-Super League Premier League clubs unanimously and vigorously rejected plans for the Super League. On Tuesday evening, the cracks are beginning to show. Manchester City were pulling out of the European Super League, with Chelsea on the verge of following suit. Manchester United executive Ed Woodward announced his resignation at the end of 2021 season. By Sunday night, the dam had well and truly burst after mounting pressure since the first announcement from the Super League. All 6 of the Premier League teams involved announced they were to formally withdraw from the competition. By Wednesday, the dream was dead. Both Atletico Madrid and Inter Milan pulled out, with just 4 of the initial 12 teams remaining. The problem now is whether fans will choose to forgive and forget, or whether is this a new beginning of reform in European football.
Yes, very interesting there. And speaking on the point of the fans, I spoke to Liverpool fan and broadcaster Neil Atkinson from the independent fan media company, the Anfield Wrap, to get a fan's perspective on what's been going on, and particularly on what Real Madrid President Florentino Perez had to say about the European Super League in his justifications. I think the couple of interviews he's done can be labelled as bizarre, and it's interesting to hear what fans think about his attempts to justify the competition and remain adamant that it is required for the sustainability of elite football. Here's what Neil had to say. So Neil, I think once you kind of get over the initial anger, I guess you have at these owners and individuals, there's almost sort of a kind of a comical element to how things have been kind of carried out. And you could almost sort of appreciate nobody's favorite late night TV host personality, Florentino Perez. And I think the whole kind of strategy behind this project, the Super League project, can kind of be summed up by the fact that they sent out a 74-year-old to talk about what kids want these days.
That's one thing that sums it up. The other thing is that he's still, broadly speaking, the only person who's been connected to it who's spoken on the record, which for me is really, really crazy. Other than to apologise, they've not actually explained what the ancillary benefits of their scheme beyond them having more money and more money guaranteed actually were, and that to me is the most ridiculous thing about all of this. And I think it is ridiculous. We've lived through, I'd say, at least 10 years where there's been this real threat of, oh no, the clubs might go and do a breakaway league. That arguably has gone on longer, but they've used it more as a bargaining tool rather than a hypothetical across the last 10 years. And then they do it, and it all collapses into dust within 3 days. No one explains it properly. No one fronts it up. These people have styled themselves in a footballing sense as the masters of the universe. They've styled themselves as we're the people who are in control of everything. And there's been a bit of a case around aspects of that. And what they've done is they've just destroyed their own reputations. And I think that this is the important part and should remain the important part. They've destroyed their own reputations in a matter of 3 days. They couldn't even control the reactions of their own players. They didn't even have the sense to consult with their own managers in advance. There isn't a bit of this where they didn't just lose the arguments. They left themselves absolutely sort of decimated. And they're now left with, I think, world football's biggest ever example of Emperor's New Clothes.
Yeah. And I think sort of on that, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at Perez's comments from last night, and it's just more justification, really. And almost as if nothing, he hasn't done anything wrong. Just on it, an interesting thing about, what kind of came out with that is obviously it's no kind of surprise that, Barcelona, Real Madrid are really struggling financially. And yes, the pandemic is one thing, but I just can't help to think back to sort of where football has gone over the last 10, 15 years. And if we use transfers as an example, in terms of competing at that highest level, it has gone a bit mad. And I just wonder, and expectations have gone a bit mad. Just wonder, I don't know if we're slowly starting to see a bubble maybe that's bursting.
I think that the difficult part on that is going to be the aspects around what the independently wealthy clubs do. And by wealthy, I mean billions. I don't mean independently wealthy like the local businessman done good. I mean, effectively we're talking about Chelsea, we're talking about City, and we're talking about Paris Saint-Germain. Because I think that part of what has led Madrid and Barcelona to this sort of impasse that they find themselves is that they're very much committed to the idea that they've got to have not just the best players, but more the highest profile players. And they've committed to that in the context of endlessly raging and raising wage costs on top of the fact that the same thing can happen with transfer fees. And the only way you really get gas out of that particular balloon is if City, Chelsea and Paris Saint-Germain stop putting gas in it. And that, within the proposal, and what's frustrating about sort of going within the proposal thing is you're actually doing the justification work that they never bothered to do. But within the proposal, the idea of capping expenditure to everyone who signed up at 55% salary and transfer fees is actually quite an important detail. What are the issues with the proposal in general, and why I don't think any of them spoke about it at all or at all well, is that bar getting more money, they all, I think, had one or two other things they were very eager to have included, but they hadn't agreed on what the priority list of what those were, because what matters to the Spanish clubs, Real Madrid, Barcelona and Atletico Madrid, to a slightly lesser extent, don't need to worry about qualification for the Champions League. They absolutely dominate Spanish football and they're in every year. Whereas for the English clubs, there was a problem around the fact that firstly, 6 into 4 won't go. And in English football, you're more likely to have what we can sort of phrase as dark horse sides like Leicester or Wolves or Everton come up on the rails and challenge for a top 4 space. So not only does 6 into 4 not go, but it might some years be 6 into 3 if Leicester do especially well like they're doing this season. So you end up, well, that's the English side's priorities. We need to get this bit sorted out. The Spanish teams are like, well, we need to take the gas out of the balloon because it's killing us and we can't cope with it. I think Liverpool in particular are very very eager around media rights acquisition and having the freedom to sell the rights to their own games, which I think is a bit different to some of the others who aren't as bothered by that. So there was no coherence amongst them as to what it was they actually wanted. But within that, there is the ads at some point, the nettle of continually raising expenditure does need to be grasped. You know, you've only got to look at the number of sides, in part because of COVID, but not solely, when they've released their accounts that have got really significant operating losses across the last 12 months. And part of that is they created a barely sustainable collective sort of landscape. COVID hits and it's now not at all sustainable. So, you know, Everton's loss is something like the 7th highest ever operating loss in English football history across the course of a year. But Everton have invested in that. That's a deliberate decision. But if Everton invest in that, it has knock-on effects and ramifications for other people and so on and so forth. So I think that is that's a legitimate concern. To go about fixing that legitimate concern in this way is absolutely ridiculous, because all this stuff's a fine line. What Real Madrid actually don't want is they would like there to be curbs on spending, but not so much that they curb Real Madrid's spending. And we can sort of expand that sort of point over and over again for all of these clubs. And it's why they are actually better working in concert with however many clubs there were either in the ECA or in UEFA competition, because they actually are quite disparate amongst 12. And that's a massive power struggle amongst 12. And it's less of a power struggle when you're dealing with a number of clubs in the hundreds.
Yeah. And, you know, as a top legacy Red yourself, do you think there is any way back for these owners? And I'm talking about in terms of the relationship now that's kind of been broken, I guess, with the fans. And yes, there's been issues in the past, but this kind of feels like, you know, something bigger than all of those combined.
I think it's really hard, but I think the thing always to remember on this is that time and playing some football matches sorts things out. You know, I've had this thing all the way through COVID. So you've worked with us at the Anfield Wrap, and one of the things we've learned from the Anfield Wrap is don't do anything mad during an international break, because what happens is that everyone just talks about the mad thing that you've done or said, and it just spirals, and you can't ever calm it back down. COVID's sort of like an endless international break, in a sense, and we're all living this sort of half-life in terms of what we can and can't do. And so therefore people are spending more time on social, more time on the phone. It's the way they connect with their friends predominantly, and has been now for a long period of time. And you've been left in a scenario where therefore, you know, the place where I register my disapproval is on the internet. The place where I register my affection is on the internet. The place where I do X, Y, or Z is on the internet. I think for the Liverpool's owners, firstly, I think that they should genuinely be thinking about some actions. And by owners, if John Henry wants to front it, which is the way he's phrased his statements, that's absolutely fine. But when it's easier to meet people in person, I think that John Henry should be, you know, when they first bought Liverpool, Henry met a number of different sort of bodies / stakeholders, came over and spent some time. I think that's what he's got to do again. I think he's got to basically do 4 weeks in the city, meet people. Some of that should be structured and organised. Some of it should be as simple as walking into a certain boozer, you know, and taking a bit of a gamble on that, but being open and listening. The other thing I think that needs to happen from a Liverpool point of view in general is that, you know, for instance, John Henry should start attending Premier League meetings, which he doesn't do. I think he's only ever attended one, I think I'm right in saying. He should start doing that, because if he wants to bring about that sort of change, the only way he's going to be able to do it is through building consensus. That's the thing that is now absolutely crystal clear, and it's the thing that's been missed. And I've got loads of issues, like my list of issues with the Premier League and UEFA, but my list of issues with the Premier League, as we've discussed before, are practically endless. Yeah. But the fact of the matter is that essentially 7 clubs can veto anything. Yeah. So if you want to bring about change in the Premier League, 7 clubs can veto anything. You need 14 on board. If you want to bring about change in English football, which does not involve the government, but even the government, therefore, is part of building consensus, going to meetings, explaining your position in detail, backing it up with the facts, making your points about X and Y, and saying, you know, we think our position is reasonable. Because I think that part of this is, I think that John Henry thinks John Henry's position is reasonable. And I think there's lots of aspects of John Henry's position that I suspect actually is quite reasonable, but he's not walking into any rooms and making any of those points with anyone who has the possibility of disagreeing with him. A lot of this stuff feels like it's cooked up in rooms. You know, the Project Big Picture thing was done with Joel Glazer. I just don't feel as though, whilst they may disagree on a few fundamental aspects around political life, supposedly, I just don't feel as though Joel Glazer and John Henry are going to give each other that much pushback.
Yeah.
And pushback's fine. Like pushback doesn't mean you're wrong. Pushback's just pushback. If you spend too much time sitting in rooms, not with people who agree with you because you've got money, but people who agree with you by virtue of the fact that they're in the same room as you, the very worldview that they have means they are likely to agree if by virtue of what they've achieved and all that sort of stuff, backgrounds and the way in which they think about sport because they're also American or something like that. And that isn't to disparage the American outlook around sport. It's not for me, but there's stuff that we can all learn from it, and football should never stop evolving. What we've evolved football into, frankly, is a situation which, on the one hand, the game in this country and abroad has been able to be used for sports washing to a degree. The thing I'd say about the 12 owners, to talk about like the idea of a Liverpool change of owner, you had all the types of owners you could want, with the exception to an extent of the German model. But even within there, theoretically, Madrid and Barcelona are socio arrangements. You've got all the ownership types, and they've all been part of this thing that's gone so badly wrong. So I don't think there's any sort of. I think people will be very angry, and they might want FSG to sell, and that's. People are well within their rights to want that. If I felt there was someone really clear or a type of owner that it was really clear to say, well, if we got rid of FSG, we could have this type of owner, then I'd be, well, I'm all in, lads. As it is, I don't care either way. If FSG sold, I wouldn't be gutted at this stage because of everything that's gone on. The flip side is that, I wouldn't be thinking, well, things are going to be well better now because things haven't been well better now elsewhere.
And kind of on that, you've touched on it there, that it's clear, reform is needed, and not just in terms of a Premier League level. UEFA have come out with their proposal for the Champions League and all that's come with that. What do you want to see happen, and not just in terms of reforming football from a competition point of view, but in terms of ownership models and all the rest that's come out during this debate?
I think in terms of. I think the first thing that you need to do is you need to be very clear what you think football's purpose is. And I think it's important to sort of take it one step at a time. I think that the first place that is easier to be impacted by English football is obviously in the United Kingdom. We can't. Firstly, it's difficult to sort, in inverted commas, UEFA out. Secondly, it becomes even harder to sort UEFA out in the context of, well, they're able to quite easily go, well, you haven't got your house in order. Go and get your house in order first. You can't go to a group of Europeans, especially in the current political climate, and go, you've got to get all this fixed. And we know the best way to do it because they're able to go, well, hang on, look at your mess. So I think ultimately, there's going to be really basic bells and whistles in this that are just irrelevant, and they're already beginning to rear their heads. The number of people who went, right, kick-off times next was just utterly ridiculous. It really was utterly ridiculous. How about ownership models next? How about what we think should or shouldn't be spent on a football club next? How about how we feel as though who should or shouldn't own football clubs? How about that next? Let's not worry too much about the kick-off times. But part of what that is that that's the thing that supporters feel as though directly impacts them. And I think being able to have structural conversations. I'll be dead clear about this. I am really concerned about this government's idea of what a review will be and how it will all work, because not least because it's this government. They don't believe in regulation. They believe in deregulation. They do not believe in regulation. So it's almost like asking a dog to ride a bike. It doesn't know what a bike is, and it doesn't understand how it works, and it doesn't want much to do with it. And that's what worries me here, is that you're going to end up with loads of dogs trying to learn how to ride bikes really quickly when they haven't got any real love for the game, any real understanding for it. And they'll use a lot of phrases like fan-led, but it needs to be both fan-led, and the fans also do need to an extent be led by the idea of how do we make the game what we want it to be, and not just concern ourselves with the trivial aspects.
Thank you very much for that very interesting interview, Fuad. We're now very lucky to be joined by Kieran Maguire, Professor at the University of Liverpool and author of the book and host of the podcast, The Price of Football. It's great to have you on, Kieran. Thank you very much. So, of course, now that the European Super League isn't happening, what would it have meant, though, for the future of football if it were to have gone ahead?
It would have been a significant change. I think everybody in this country and also in Europe has grown up with the idea of football being a competitive sport which has jeopardy. Jeopardy in terms of failing to win matches means you get relegated. Jeopardy in terms of winning matches means you achieve success and win trophies and get the glory. The proposals were to semi-replace that. There was still a competition which people would have been aiming to win, but the punishment, the consequences of playing poorly would have been very much reduced, because the 15 founder members of this franchise competition would have been guaranteed places ad infinitum as far as the competition was concerned. And that meant that there was no opportunities for clubs to progress to the competition, and clearly in the opposite direction as well. So that's that was one issue. It was due to be a midweek competition. We already have a midweek competition called the Champions League. Is there enough space for both of those from a TV audience perspective? I don't think so. I think it would have been very challenging. So there would have been a fight. I suspect there would have been, a winner and a loser, or perhaps they could have lived side by side at significantly different values. So therefore, there was likely to be a significant reduction in European TV rights, which are spread between 55 countries. The proposal for the tournament, that it was self-styled Super League, because I failed to see what is super about a European league which consisted of clubs from 3 countries and 7 cities.
So do you think that now this might trigger some sort of reform in European football, because we've seen the fans so mobilised in a way that we might not have seen before?
I think it's unlikely, and if there will be reform, it will be slow and marginal. And the reason for that is that although it was a fairly tumultuous 48, 72 hours as far as European football was concerned, the clubs involved have been accepted back immediately by UEFA. In the interim period, UEFA pushed through significant changes to the format of European football in the form of the Champions League, which financially and in other ways significantly benefit the clubs that were going to join the franchise league. So these clubs had, to a large extent, a no-lose decision to make. The additional concessions which have been given to them by UEFA achieved 85% of their objectives. And then when they decided that wasn't enough, because some of these clubs are in desperate need of cash, and there was an opportunity to borrow money from the debt markets from JP Morgan, because there was this need for cash, they decided to go for 100% of their objectives in their competition. That ceased to be. So now they're back with nearly a full cake, but not quite.
So just on the topic of reform there, obviously the 2 German teams that were invited to join the Super League, Dortmund and Bayern Munich, rejected the invitation. And many think it's probably because of the 50+1 rule that they have in Germany, where at least 51% of the shares have to be held by fans. Do you think that would work in Britain?
I think it would be a challenge, because it would require either the clubs in the Premier League to vote for it themselves, and some of those clubs are owned by oligarchs, sovereign wealth funds, commodity traders, who are not used to sharing ownership or power. And the idea for them of being a minority shareholder is something which they would not feel comfortable with. They are used to making decisions. They are used to being the person in charge. So I think there could be a cultural issue. And in addition to that, I think there would be significant legal and logistical challenges. Not least of all is the fact that we have Manchester United, which is a company which is registered in the Cayman Islands and traded in New York. So it could be that there could be opposition from the US courts to this, from minority shareholders in the club who were unhappy about this decision, or indeed the Glazer family themselves. So I think it's a nice thought. To a certain extent, it's a bit like saying the rest of Europe drives on the right-hand side of the road. Let us drive on the right-hand side of the road, because that would actually allow less potential accidents when people are moving from the UK mainland to the European mainland and vice versa. There would be reductions in costs of tooling up in individual factories if we got more people driving, but the transformation costs in terms of everything in this country is geared to driving on the left-hand side of the road would make it prohibitive. So I think that would be the challenge. There are alternatives to the 50+1 rule, such as some form of golden share, some form of veto that fan groups could be given in terms of decisions affecting the club for fundamental issues, such as moving out, resigning from the Premier League, moving to a new stadium, change of colour of shirt if you want to go down the populist route. Or we could have some form of mandate to come from government which says that in order for football clubs in this country to have a licence and to be approved by either the local authorities or the local police authorities in terms of the safety certificate, so you could bring it in that way, those clubs must allow or must make available at least 2 non-executive director roles in terms of being able to sit on the board. And therefore, although those non-executive directors might not be able to force through or even veto decisions, the role of a non-executive director is that of a critical friend. And if somebody had come up with these schemes and they've been discussed at the boardroom level at Anfield and at Old Trafford and the Etihad as far as the Northwest is concerned, then you would hope that those people who were representative of a huge swathe of what a club's identity revolves around, which is its fan group, those people would turn around and say, this is not going to work because it goes against the culture, the history, the heritage of being a Liverpool fan, a Manchester United fan, a Manchester City fan, and so on.
And finally, do you think that fans will forgive the owners despite what a lot of them have revealed themselves to be this week?
It will vary from club to club. I think it's no coincidence that the 2 clubs who reversed the decision and withdrew from the franchise league were Manchester City and Chelsea. Now, both of the owners of those clubs are more focused on winning trophies than they are in terms of having financial success. And indeed, the owners are looking for some form of validation. We have Roman Abramovich, who's a Russian oligarch, and we've got Sheikh Mansour, who represents Abu Dhabi. And they want to see themselves as being champions of the fans. And historically, they have always been held in very high regard by the fans because, if we're honest, their role is that of a sugar daddy. And as football fans like sugar daddies, they like somebody who is going to indulge them through improvements in infrastructure and improvements, most of all, of course, on the playing and management side of things. Roman Abramovich has been at Chelsea for 18 years. He's delivered trophies from what was a moderate club historically, and he has had elevated status on the back of that. The decision to join the franchise league destroyed that. And I think as soon as he saw the extent of the protests from Chelsea fans and others, he was able, in a position, being effectively a dictator, as a 100% shareholder, of reversing that decision. When it comes to some of the other clubs, and again, I think we focus on the Northwest, John Henry's track record in terms of being in contact or having an understanding of what it is to be a Liverpool fan. And by a Liverpool fan, I now have to use this word, a legacy Liverpool fan, because apparently there's 2 types. There's people that went along to Anfield with their mum and their dad and their grandparents or whatever it was, at the age of 6 or 7, they stood on the cop, or they stood on their parents' shoulders, or they sat next to your mum and dad, and they fell in love with football, and they fell in love with Liverpool. Those people are no longer wanted by the people who are organising this tournament or this function. John Henry has made, I think, some significant errors. The use of the furlough scheme, the pricing for when the ground was extended, and now this. All of these things were designed to boost the bottom line, to see Liverpool Football Club purely as an investment vehicle. So whilst the club does have a catchy slogan, as far as John Henry is concerned, Liverpool means more money. And for Liverpool fans, I suspect they feel uncomfortable with that. And it will take a long time to build bridges. Now, it could be that they go and announce the signing of Kylian Mbappe in the summer, and instantly things are forgotten and forgiven, because football can be a very shallow business in terms of the way that fans behave. But I think those Liverpool fans with longer memories will be very, very cautious about trusting somebody such as John Henry, whose decision making doesn't represent their views.
Thank you very much for coming on, Kieran. That was brilliant. I'm going to pass back over to Tom now, who's going to go in with his interview. But thank you very much for joining us, Kieran.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. So, as a supporter of a football club in the second division, Reading, I decided I wanted to take the European Super League and have a look about what that's going to mean for fans of clubs down the pyramid scheme. Now, I spoke to Adrian Williams. He was the former Reading captain, and he's currently working at the BBC. He's a perfect person to have a look into, what sort of impact this is going to mean on fans down the country. First of all, AD, for those that aren't as big Reading fans as I am, could you give a little bit of background of who you are and a little bit about what you're up to at the moment?
Yeah. Hi, Tom. Great to see you. Former professional footballer. As you say, Reading was really my main club. I was born in Reading. I played 9 years for Reading before leaving to play for Wolves for 4 years. I played for Coventry. I came back to Reading for another 4 years. I played 399 games for Reading, just missed out on the 400. I played for Millwall, played for Swindon, and very fortunate to have played for Wales as well. So I represented my country. But I guess Reading has always been my club. And I retired when I was 38. I made my debut when I was 17. So 21 years. I'm pretty pleased with that. Majority of my career was in the Championship. And as I say, represented Wales over a long period. I played Italy many times and went to Brazil, and incredible players to play alongside and of course against. But retired when I was 38. I now work for the local BBC. I'm a sports journalist on the BBC radio, and of course we cover all Reading games, which has been pretty exciting up to about now in the season.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we don't have anything better to say on that. I wish we did, but maybe next year, hey?
Who knows? I mean, we had such a good start. We won 7 on the bounce. Our 8th game was a draw. We had 22 points from a possible 24. At one stage, I think we were 15 points clear of Barnsley, 10 points clear of Norwich. But, one win in our last 8, unfortunately, we've hit a bad bit of form at the wrong time.
Yeah, exactly. Wouldn't win you any competition, that, especially now bringing on to the sort of subject, the European Super League. It would not win you, if that was to happen, any competition in that, I'm sure. Now, let's sort of just take it back to sort of Sunday evening as that news broke through about the sort of the breakaway clubs on the English leagues. What was sort of your first impressions of that?
Well, astonishment, really, in fairness. I'll tell you what was my first impression, how they kept it quiet, under wraps, because it just broke on us. And then that was it. All hell let loose. Social media is great for certain things. It's not so great for other things. I think we all know that. But it just kicked off. And then you started thinking, well, hang on a minute, these big clubs, powerful clubs, I wouldn't say, the 6 best clubs in our country at the moment, but maybe the 6 wealthiest clubs. But, and then you started thinking about, if this actually happens, where does it leave the supporter, the man in the street, the woman in the street, who absolutely loves going to their football club and supporting them in the Premier League? They were talking about there's no relegation from the European Super League, and footballers want competition. Of course they want to win things, but they also want to know, do you know what, if it isn't happening for them, you've got to fight, because there's a chance of possible relegation. And, the Premier League, I still think, is the best league in the world, and you would destroy it. You would destroy football, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And the first sort of impact we've talked about is the Big Six. They have been the focal point of this, and obviously they're the ones that are going to break away. But actually, in terms of impacts, the lower down you go down the pyramid, sort of, the impacts might be even greater. And in your opinion, someone that's played predominantly in the Championship, throughout your career in the English football pyramid, what do you think would those impacts been on those clubs?
Well, it's been desperate, hasn't it? The lower you go down the pyramid with COVID over the last 12 months has been desperate. They don't need any more knocking, trust me, because they are fighting for survival, some of these football clubs. And unfortunately, over the past couple of seasons, we've seen one or two go under, and it's never nice. A team like Bury, who I used to play against at Gig Lane. And, football for me, Tom, you've got to take away all the shiny stuff. Now, I understand the Premier League and the Champions League and the money that involves football and the television and the rights and everything else and what players are getting paid. But for me, it's a very old-fashioned way of looking at football. And, you're in a city, Liverpool, where, wow, if you're talking about history and tradition, people want to pay their money. They want to go and stand on the turnstiles. I know it's all seaters now, and I get that, but bear with me. They want to stand there. They want to watch their team. They want to buy a programme, buy a beer, buy a hot dog. If they've got the kids, a couple of scarves and a hat, the wife is there as well. Loads of women, which is amazing to see, brilliant, and girls. And, they love football just like boys and men now. And it's brilliant. It's going out to watch a game of football. And you used to stand and watch the coach arrive and your heroes, and you would take pictures with an old-fashioned camera, and you might ask these superheroes to sign the programme. That's what football's all about for me. It isn't about hospitality. It isn't about, as Roy Keane famously once said about Prawn Sandwich Brigade. I understand that, and it needs revenue, and there's a time and a place for that. And I've been lucky in my career. I've had plenty of that. But, supporters are what make football clubs. Liverpool, probably where you are, is the prime example.
Yeah, absolutely. My sort of, time at Liverpool, I've never known a city that's just quite that football dominated. They've got that sort of, that fierce rivalry. They've also got the element of the fans coming together. And that's actually something we've seen enormously on social media, the protests outside Stamford Bridge. Is that sort of like a positive perhaps to this all, that sort of, that fan culture, if you like, that we've seen, we've not seen over the last 12 months because of COVID, but we've seen it sort of, come back in a way almost.
I think so. And you mentioned a really good word, an important word, rivalry. Now, Liverpool and Everton, fierce rivalry, always has been. You've got members of family wearing red, you've got the other half of the family wearing blue, and they go to Goodison, they go to Anfield, and they sit next to each other, and they have the crack, they have the banter, and you enjoy a game of football. Liverpool need Everton, Everton need Liverpool. When north of the border, Celtic and Rangers, when Rangers were demoted, 3 divisions, whatever it is. Celtic lost out as well. Trust me. You need that rivalry. The Manchester clubs, I guess I can say, because I'm a neutral, and they say, no, we don't. We don't need the rivalry. I hope they get relegated. But for the neutral, you need that rivalry. And I thought it was brilliant the way the supporters come together. It really was. And, talking to Manchester clubs, Gary Neville obviously, came out quite vocal on Monday Night Football. And I think we're talking about social media, how it can be good and bad. But when you're high profile, like a lot of these ex-footballers and current footballers are, it's an unbelievable platform to make your point. And social media with Neville and Carragher, and then James Milner came out, Liverpool's vice captain, and said, well, players don't have a say in it. Doesn't matter if a player earning 200 grand a week, he doesn't have a say in it. He gets paid to play football and get out on the training pitch, stay fit, play the game, have your shower, get back out on the pitch on the Monday morning. So, these guys are so famous and so well known, and their platforms are so big on social media now, along with the supporters, the Leeds players wearing the T-shirts, obviously in the warm-up of their game. It was brilliant to see, because football have been crying out for that. And it didn't matter who you were. It didn't matter if you was a red, a blue, a black and white, stripes, a hoops, whatever it was. Everyone come together and said, we can't have this. This cannot happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've never, in my time, I've been on Twitter for years, and I've never ever seen everyone from, no matter who you support, where you are, come together in that sort of way against this project. And, people are sort of giving perhaps Man City, Chelsea the credit for being the first ones to drop out, if you were. But really, do you think it's the fans that deserve the credit? The players, the Leeds players, Carragher, Neville, are they the ones that really deserve the credit?
I think so. I'm biased because, like I say, football club's all about fans, the ex-players, the current players, 100%. Because, let's be brutally honest. And, I don't want to say anything too controversial, but it was only when it all kicked off they backtracked. Maybe if the fans and the pundits and the media and the social media and the past players hadn't been so vocal, then we'd have all been tippy-toeing around, and they might have still been hanging in there because, the president of Real Madrid, Mr. Perez, I think his name is, he's still adamant this is going to happen. But, it's almost like you're sorry when you get caught out. Yeah. Well, you know what? Fine. I've seen all the statements of the clubs. I've seen the owners come out and do their social media bit and everyone congratulating them. Well, do you know what? It was a bad move. It was agreed purely down to financial reward. And, at the end of the day, honestly, I'm so pleased. It may happen, but may not happen for a very long time.
Yeah, and that actually sort of draws me on to my sort of next question, which is about the future. They said, this is not going to happen now, but, it doesn't rule it out in the future. It doesn't stop a project, maybe not exactly the same, but certainly something similar from happening. Are you sort of worried about that at all?
Listen, you can only control the controllables, and, football's changed so much in the last 5, 10, 15 years. VAR's come in, squad numbers, financial fair play. It's changed. It's unrecognisable, football, to what it was 20 years ago. So, who knows what's going to happen in the future. But I tell you what, you're talking about European giants. Wasn't it brilliant to see PSG and Bayern Munich not get involved? That was a Champions League final 12 months ago. Yeah. Those two clubs, I thought, good on you, because they come out smelling the roses.
Yeah, and it's interesting you picked up on Bayern there. The Bundesliga have got famous the 50+1 rule. So, fans essentially control the clubs. They're the ones that pull the strings. Is that something you might like to see introduced here in the UK?
I don't know, Tom. I don't know enough behind the scenes. I don't know enough, if I'm being honest, about owners and the boardroom and what goes on nowadays. It's very simple. When I was playing, there was a manager, there was a chairman, there was probably 3 or 4 directors, a CEO, and towards the end of my career, there was a director of football. And you know what? They sat at a table and they either agreed on something or they didn't, and that was it. So I don't know the answers to that. I'm not involved enough in the boardroom at that level. But listen, the owners of football clubs spend millions, hundreds of millions, billions of pounds. So, we give them credit for that, 100%, because they are bringing the best players into the Premier League. We are watching it on TV. We are lucky that the likes of Sky and BT and the BBC and Amazon and, these companies, okay, we have to pay a premium, but it's our choice. So I'm not knocking any of that. Anything, revolving, I don't know, how can I say it? If I think something is value for money, that's my choice. I don't have to pay the subscription. If I don't think it's value for money, I won't pay it, whether it's a jacket, whether it's a pair of sunglasses, whether it's a car, or whether it's Sky Sports. But I happen to think I'm blessed, I'm fortunate, and I love my sport and I love my football. So I'm not knocking all these owners, but it was just a bad move.
Yeah, absolutely with you on that one. I think that's one brilliant thing, to be fair, about lockdown, the amount of sport on the telly, the amount of time we've probably all had, most of us anyway, to watch that sport. I think that, that's something we've all been grateful about.
Been brilliant. He's kept a lot of people going, Tom. It's been tough, very tough. I'm fortunate. I've got a garden and touch wood, I've got my health and I can go for a walk and I can go for a run. But, I was watching football matches from the 70s. I mean, you weren't even born in the 90s probably, but they were putting on the rugby and the golf and the tennis, and it was brilliant for me, absolutely brilliant. It was my era growing up. And you know what, when I was 7, 8, 9, 10 years of age, watching the Kenny Dalglishes and these Kevin Keegan superstars at the time, that's what made me want to dream. That was my ambition, to be like one of those when I was kicking a ball in the garden. So yeah, bring it on. More sport on the telly, terrestrial telly, hopefully, the better.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, AD, thank you so much for your time this evening. It's been absolutely brilliant, to speak to you about your thoughts on the European Super League. And I'm with you. Fingers crossed it doesn't happen for now. But anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Tom and Adi there for that brilliant interview. So now that we've heard from some of the experts and some of the pundits, it's time to hear what some of the fans want to think. Tom, passing over to you.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. So we've got 3 fans on the line just to hear their thoughts on the European Super League. First of all, we're going to go off to Alfie. Alfie, you there?
Hello. I'm here. I am here. Let me start off by saying that the proposed plans for a European Super League were an absolute disgrace, not just to football, but to the nation, to the world. I can't comprehend how a consortium of people could think that it was a good idea to rip the heart of football, the heart of this nation, away from us. And I just want to start by saying I'm absolutely disgraced.
Well, and who do you support, Alfie? Do you support one of the big 6 clubs?
I'm a Liverpool fan through and through. You can tell from my Scouse accent.
And so let's take it back to Sunday night. You're sat there, you're watching this news break. As a Liverpool fan, what's the first thing that comes to your head? Was there any part of you that thought, you know what, this might be good to see, Liverpool compete against these teams week in, week out? Or was it straight away, no, I don't want to be part of this?
Listen, I can understand the appeal behind something like that. But the way I see it, I think the Champions League as it is pretty bang on the money. Like, I understand that, you're not always every season going to see, for example, Liverpool play Real Madrid. I mean, you're never going to see Arsenal play Real Madrid for a long time, So I can see why some fans might have potentially been in favour. But to be honest, the overwhelming response I thought was completely negative, of course. And mine definitely wasn't positive. I just, frankly, I couldn't really believe it was true until it was already finished. I was just confused more than anything. But I think as a fan of football, not, sort of bias aside, it was just, I think it was dreadful. And if it had been allowed to happen, I think it would have killed the game. I mean, you've got to think about the lower league clubs, what's going to happen to them sort of thing. So thank the heavens that it's not going to happen, eh?
Absolutely. And just finally, on the sort of the positive side, we saw football come together, fans from all over the world, football communities, they're out on the streets, outside Elland Road, Stamford Bridge. Was that nice, that element of it?
Do you know what? I love that. Football in unity. It's too often nowadays, especially I think, when you see on social media and sort of in the news and stuff, fans a lot of the time nowadays are just at each other's throats, and a lot of the time, people are just saying stuff to get on other people's nerves. People aren't even really giving real opinions about football anymore half the time, especially on places like Twitter and stuff. So to see, fans of every club sort of finally united, I mean, it's probably something that we might not see something similar to that for quite a long time. And it was, I think, very nice. I mean, you saw the images of the fans outside, Stamford Bridge and outside, Leeds Stadium and all them like places. It was just good to see. But one thing I will say, just a final note, is we can't stop now and we can't forgive the people who are responsible and let these clubs get off scot-free, because it was the idea of it, even the attempt was terrible, I think. So just to sort of let life resume as normal in terms of letting the clubs come back and do this, that and the other, I think we can't allow it.
Well, thank you very much for that, Alfie. Some passionate views. We're going to go over to Issa next. Issa, are you on the line?
Yeah, I'm here.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for joining us, Issa. Very quickly, who do you support?
I'm a Manchester United fan.
Manchester United. So again, another one of the top 6 clubs that were involved in the Breakaway project. First of all, your thoughts on it?
Well, I mean, much like everyone else, I was kind of disappointed that we were kind of presented with this system. And more so the fact that all these clubs kind of believed that they had the divine right to be these top 12 teams. And if you look at the Premier League table now, like look where Arsenal and Tottenham are. I mean, like, they're nowhere near the top, and why should they have the divine right to be in the top teams? Well, like teams like Leicester, West Ham, they're performing much better. But I mean, I suppose it just comes down to the money aspect, doesn't it? Like, they're the richest clubs in the world. They have the opinion, they have the voice, and that's why they have the power.
Precisely. As a United fan, I just want to touch on Ed Woodward. He's obviously leaving his post at the club at the end of the season, or the end of the year, actually, should I say. What were your thoughts on that?
I think he should have gone a long time ago. I mean, I know a lot of United fans that I know personally, they aren't a fan of him. They never have been. I mean, since he came in, he's obviously done, he's done the best he can. But in recent years, especially now, there's better options. We can do a lot better. I think him leaving would be, good for the club and kind of bring a new page.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Issa. Again, passionate views. And we're going to go on to our final caller now. Is Ben on the line?
Hi, Tom.
Hi, Ben. Great to have you on. Very quickly, who do you support?
Oh, I'm a Burnley fan.
Burnley. Okay, so not a top six fan. But
No.
as you've heard through the show, there is going to be consequences of the project, regardless who you support. So, as someone that didn't support one of these big six clubs, was it worrying? Was it worrying that the Premier League was potentially not what it was 24 hours before?
As a point of view from a fan, yeah, because it meant that we wouldn't get the big days out at the big clubs, which, when I was watching Burnley in the Championship, they're the days that you dream of, like your days away at Anfield, Old Trafford. I've seen Burnley win at Old Trafford, that's just the stuff of dreams, really. So it was a bit of a shock towards that, yeah.
Absolutely. And there's been a phenomenal reaction against these six clubs. And what was your opinion on it? Should they be punished, or do you know what? They bring in a lot of money. Should we just say, we forgive you this time, but don't let it happen again?
I think there need to be some pretty serious punishments, to be honest. I think if they don't clamp down on it hard now, we're just going to be in the same place 5-10 years down the line. So it's better to have a better firm handling of it now. But I don't think a fine will be enough. I don't think you can fine these rich owners. I think that won't affect them at all. They'll just pay it and then move on to try and make more money. I think we need European bans, points deduction in the league, and that will really create a level playing field in the league. So if you look at the Premier League now, if you gave a point deduction to most of the top six teams, you can see that when you have those points deducted, you can see that teams in the top would be like Leicester, West Ham, Everton, Villa. That then creates a more competitive league. They can get in a higher caliber of player and actually get to compete in the Champions League as well, or Europa League, which I think would be quite a good spectacle.
Absolutely. And then just finally, what do you think the future is for football in terms of its ownerships? Burnley, a club that's obviously got American owners, rather like Liverpool, Manchester United and Arsenal. What do you think these owners need to do, or is there anything they can do to win fans back over?
I don't think there's much that the owners of Man United or Liverpool can do at the moment. I think they've made their beds and now they've got a lie in it. The fans aren't too happy with them. I don't think there's too much they can do. I think with the whole owner argument, there needs to be something done at a higher level, more vetting that can go into who can actually own a club, and more serious debates around that, just because it's a bit of a shambles at the moment. It seems like anyone can own a club.
Fantastic. And thank you very much, Ben. Wishing Burnley all the best for the rest of the season. Now back over to you, Lindsay.
Thank you very much to Tom and to all our guests there for coming on. So just to end the show, we've obviously heard what everybody else has to say, but Fuad, do you have any opinions on what's happened this week?
I think we've pretty much heard, everything, the range of emotion that has been felt, and it's interesting as well to get the point of view from fans who aren't necessarily with the big six club. Hearing a Burnley fan there talk about Old Trafford, Anfield, these are the big days out. And yes, the teams that did break away wanted to stay in the Premier League, but obviously the spectacle goes down. I think what's clear, to be honest, with all of this is that football has been a mess for a long time, and the fact that we have seen such great fan unity and people getting behind this. It's important that we kind of ride the crest of this wave now and really kind of go for more reform and head in a direction where football is about the fans and we don't have these debates and arguments about legacy fans and people watching it from all around the world. I think there's room to include the benefits and the wants of both types of fans. So yeah, it's good to see, and hopefully this is just a start of a kind of further movement to solve a lot of the other issues that have been kind of plaguing football for the last 15-20 years.
Yeah, definitely. So I think a lot of people would say that this is just the way that football's headed, the same as any other industry, and coming with globalization and things like that. But I think there are ways to do it. I mean, maybe as we heard from Kieran Maguire, the 50+1 rule might not be the best way forward at the moment, because I do think that, especially in the Premier League, we are quite deep into sort of the commercialization, and obviously you have the different ownership models, you have state owned as well, and I think it's quite complicated to get fan involvement with them, as Kieran said. But I think it is a positive to see fans so mobilised over one thing. And I think it is now the time more than ever to try and hand some of that power back into fans, because at the end of the day, as we've seen with COVID and fans not being allowed in stadiums, it really does affect the game. It really has shown us how much fans are needed in football. So hopefully this is the time that owners will now sort of sit up and listen to their fans and realise that without them, they wouldn't have what they have. So I think they should have a little bit more input. So hopefully, if anything good comes out of this, it will be open some conversations for reform.
Yeah, definitely.
Anyone else got any final thoughts? Tom, you've got anything else to say before we finish?
Well, just very briefly, again, coming at it from a fan point that's not in the top six. This is not what football is for me. Football, the grassroots of football is very much the backbones of communities. I spoke about it with AD. A city like Liverpool is really built from a community point of view from football. Everywhere you go, they're either a blue, they're a red, and that's very much how a lot of these big cities are around the country. And something like this, breaking down those communities, those sort of rivalries you've got here in the UK. It's just, it was something that worried me a lot. And I'm glad fans have come together, no matter who they were, and have essentially brought down this project.
Yeah. I think, sorry, just to quickly on that, I think as a Liverpool fan and as someone, has been lucky to be a match going fan for a few years, it's quite, it was quite kind of sad really to see the club's name get dragged down and all this, because at the end of the day, this is a few individuals at the top of football clubs and people who are detached from football clubs in terms of emotional bonds and whatever else. And, to see the names of these, historic and great clubs who have been built on, like Tom said, community initiatives, working class game, it is sad. And hopefully, we don't get too bogged down in necessarily calling out these clubs and diminishing the names of these clubs. And we just kind of focus our anger and reform, if you like, towards the people that own them.
Brilliant. Well, thank you to all our amazing guests that joined us today. We've had some really interesting discussions, and thank you to Fuad and Tom for joining me today. Thank you to everyone